In the early 1970s, Sears and Roebuck, for some strange reason, founded a national fellowship program that would bring 20 undergraduate journalism students from all over the country to Washington, D.C., get them a job with an internship with members of Congress, and then have investigative reporters come and teach them at night. It was an amazing and, in many ways, let's face it, kind of absurd idea, but I got to be lucky and be one of those interns. And that meant I came to Washington, D.C., and I was living on Capitol Hill and walking to and from my office, or to the Senator Lee Metcalf from Montana, who I was the only person who had a fellowship with a senator from his home state. It was quirky. But I'd walk past this giant townhouse, a white townhouse at the corner of 4th and A Southeast. And nobody ever seemed to be coming in or out of it. Every day I'd walk past, morning and evening, I never saw a human being, but they had a plaque on the side of the door. And it turned out to be the national headquarters for the very respectable American Historical Association. But that, it still felt to me, and this was in the era of J. Edgar Hoover's FBI, and the Vietnam War, and the beginnings of the rumblings of the CIA might be doing stuff that we didn't know about and maybe wanted to know about. That was the first thing that caught my eye. And the second thing was, one day walking, as I'm walking back into work, I thought, what if I get sent out to pick up lunch for everybody, which had happened because the real Senate aides were, working 12-hour days. And what if I go out to pick up lunch and I come back and everybody's been murdered? Those ideas stuck with me, and I couldn't figure out what to do about them. And then in those days, there were only 3 books. This is so hard for people to imagine now. There were only 3 factual books about the American intelligence operations printed. The 4th one that came out was really not about it. It was called The Politics of Heroin Trade in Southeast Asia, by a Wisconsin professor who went to Vietnam to, investigate the heroin trade. And I was, I guess, a year out of college. I had a great job helping the delegates to the Montana Constitutional Convention write the new constitution for the state of Montana that is now being used to protect health and environment nationwide. And that house and that thought kept bugging me. And I read that the CIA, in one of these books, tried to read almost everything that was published in the world. And I thought, well, what if they read novels? Wouldn't that make sense? I mean, John le Carré probably had some good hit tips. And those 3 what ifs came together, and I wanted to write, that was the era of James Bond, more than John le Carré, really. And James Bond could do everything. He could drive a sports car. He could leap from a building. He could draw his gun and shoot a bad guy from 100 yards away, and walk into a party and the beautiful women would swoon at his feet. Well, we all wanted that to be able to do like that. but I'd never met anyone like that. And I knew that was certainly nowhere like I was. So I created, I picked a name that I thought was as geeky as possible in those days, Ronald Malcolm. And I created him in such a way that he could do less than me or any of my friends could do. If we could run a mile in 9 minutes, he could only do it in 11 and barely get there. You know, if we could actually talk to a young woman at a party, he would only be able to stare at her. And it happened, it all came together at exactly the right moment in history. Frederick Forsyth had The Day of the Jackal. And so there, I thought, well, oh, I should have a name that creates an image in people's mind. And I wanted it to have something to do with death and danger. And vulture just didn't sound good. And I remember thinking about coyote, which is how you pronounce that in Montana. And, yeah, and I think I was flipping through one of those old dictionaries, and I flipped through, and there was a picture of a condor. And I went, you know, it's just, it has that, dangerousness about it, and it's foreign. So, intelligence is supposed to be foreign. And if you count it, it's got 6 letters, and I was doing 6 days. So it just all seemed to come. I don't know, maybe it was the poetry training from Richard Hugo I got, but it all seemed to come together. One of the things that struck me, there were 2 things. I didn't know how to account for this being longer. Like, what is he going to be doing all day Thursday when I mean, how am I going to keep the reader interested? And the other thing was, he was being hunted. And I was pretty sure when you're believed to be, as he was, a traitor, they don't work an 8-hour shift coming after you. They don't take a lunch break. They're coming after you, so you got to do the same. And I, I, I knew I had to keep him busy. I knew I had to bring the Faye Dunaway character in, but I also knew I had to wrap it up as fast as I could. And I originally did it in 5 days, but 5 days just, ugh, it was too packed. And 5 days of anything sounds boring, but 6 days sounded interesting. So I rearranged all the action to fit within that time period. And two little interesting things that most people don't know. When they went to film the movie, Robert Redford had 2 movies on his schedule. One was 6 Days of the Condor. One was All the President's Men. You can't, his Redford said to his everybody who he had a contract with, he said, "Look, I can't move my family to Washington, D.C. for a year and a half, take my kids out of school. Let's move one of these plots to New York." You can't move Watergate to New York and make a essentially fictionalized documentary. So that meant they moved Condor. And Sidney Pollack, the director, when I went up on set, he was very wonderful to me, as everyone was. And he said, "Look, I realized I couldn't have Robert Redford running around for 6 days, not shaving and wearing the same clothes all the time. So I made the screenwriters compress everything you had into as little possible time as possible. And when they were done, we counted up and we had 3 days." So that's how it got to be 3 Days of the Condor. Let me give you one other weird fact here. The Soviet KGB got a hold of the book and an early, who knows, a preview. Somehow they got the movie either. And they thought that the CIA indeed had this huge division reading novels and things, and they were behind in that. They created a secret 1,200 man or person agency to do what Condor was doing. And this was revealed in 1990 by a journalist called Pete Early, when he did a book about the KGB. And I get the phone call from the Washington Post when I'm walking my dog at night, and they said, "Jim, you created this," and I'm going, just stunned. And I said, "Excuse me, you know, I had nothing to do with this, but God, I'm glad I did." So Condor had this amazing impact beyond starting thrillers in a different direction.